Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I will be speaking to Henry Mayell. It's actually one of my business partners from a business called Viability, which we will no doubt tell you all about. It's super interesting. Henry, welcome.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. Right, before we start these things, I usually try to roll it right back to where it all began. So tell me, where did it all begin for you? How did you get started? How did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the starting point is probably school. That's as far back as we probably need to go. But I mean, the starting point for me was really an interest in maths was my sort of basis for everything. It was the one subject really that I got on quite well with at school. I enjoyed it. It was the one that I looked forward to going into. Other subjects were interesting, but they needed a bit more effort, a bit more input from my side. And at the same time, I think I was probably, I'd say, quite entrepreneurially minded, if that's a word. I wouldn't say I was an entrepreneur from an early age because I had the ideas. I like to think about stuff and speak it through with my dad, my family, whatever that might be. But at the early stage, obviously, you're quite young. You never really do anything with that. But I had all of these ideas. And one of them was interest in property. My old man is a chartered surveyor. So always discussing and talking about property-related stuff around the kitchen table or whatever that might be. And so I think I then sort of started to mash all of these different interests together. And as I was starting to talk about these sort of things, it was thrown at me a number of times, well, maybe engineering is probably a route for you to be thinking about in the future, bearing in mind at this point I'm still at school, so still having these the discussions about what subjects I'm studying, but it's all, what are we going to pick so that we can go and do whatever we want to do, whether that be at university or go off and do an apprenticeship or whatever it might be. And so I thought, okay, this engineering sounds relatively interesting. I could see a way into maybe a property side of the industry through some form of engineering. Probably better go and give it a go before I sign my life away to the engineering industry. So I went off and did a 1-week work experience in my GCSE summer, I think it was, and worked with a company called Elliott Wood. So I did a week with them in London in their central London office. And yeah, it was brilliant. It ticked a lot of the boxes. It really interested me. It was focused heavily on the math side, which was the bit I enjoyed. So I went back to school and thought, okay, I'll pick my A-levels, my choices based around doing civil engineering. Hopefully that'll be the target. And so went on and did A-levels in maths, physics and economics. And obviously, as I say, maths was the one I enjoyed, so inevitably went the best. The other two, slightly harder, slightly trickier, but with hard work, which was always sort of the way I had to do those other subjects. I just knew that it wasn't going to come instantly. So putting in the effort was the easiest way to get through it, and the math sort of sorted itself out and did its own thing because I actually enjoyed it. And I think we spent a lot of time together, me and you, Paul, but you've often mentioned that the things you enjoy are the things you find easiest to focus on, and the other stuff is harder to focus on, but you then just double down your efforts into making sure you do those just as well. So I put down or applied to go to university at Loughborough. I wanted to study a master's degree in civil engineering. Unfortunately, those other two subjects didn't go quite as well as the maths did. So instead of getting onto the master's degree, Loughborough fortunately invited me on to do a bachelor's in engineering. So I went to Loughborough in...
Can you go and do a master's degree as a first degree?
Yeah, so for engineering, typically, they do a sort of all combined. So
okay.
you do 4 years and you get your master's at the end of it, but you don't get a sort of bachelor's and then a master's. You just get one all in master's. So that's what I wanted to do, really. I wanted to go and do that 4-year programme. But like I say, grades were slightly below where they needed to be. But I knew that maths was the majority of engineering, obviously. So if I could get my way in or get a foot in the door, then I could probably move my way from the bachelor's onto the master's when I got to uni. So I did my first 2 years, and then after my results of the second year, got a phone call saying, yeah, you've done really well. We'd love to invite you over to do the master's programme.
You left university.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
So because I'd done that placement with Elliott Wood in that summer holidays, I gave them a ring and said, look, I'm fully qualified now. Could I come and join you? And they said, yeah, come along for an interview. So went down and managed to get a job with Elliott Wood as a graduate civil engineer. which was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It was a great.
What sort of stuff were you doing there?
So a whole mix, really. Some of them were sort of small-scale resi projects, so even down as small as houses. I actually also technically have an award from the Chelsea Flower Show, where I designed or did the structural engineering behind one of the gardens, so really small.
Nice. Lovely.
But all the way up to sort of larger commercial and resi schemes. As a graduate engineer, you're sort of helping with one part of it. Obviously, you're not leading a project, but it was really good and a great company to be involved with. Some.
Tell me this. As an engineer, so obviously I was sort of an engineer as well. I was a site engineer, not different thing, but as a structural design engineer, I suppose, and sort of in the office more. Tell me, and obviously that I build stuff, right? I have to deal with engineers all the time.
Yeah.
Is there a button, right, when you're doing your calculations and you design, that you press that says plus 20% arse covering factor?
Not so straightforward as a button, but there's elements of that. So there's ratios you apply, you do stuff manually, but there are elements of things you have to put on there to meet the certain requirements and make sure that those factors are applied. So you design something to a certain specification, then you add it on. It isn't quite labelled the arse covering button, but it has airs of that. There's elements of it.
Yeah, because obviously I half joke, but from a developer's point of view, trying to get stuff built at a reasonable cost, managing costs is just a massive, so it's always been an important thing, but now so more probably than ever. And there's nothing drives me around the bend more when things are quite obviously over engineered, and that obviously has big cost implications. Obviously things need to be designed properly, done safely, so they don't fall down. No one doubts that. But I've got to say, sometimes I have had some ridiculous experiences, and it seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's down to the engineer or the engineering firm. I mean, there are design codes that we as engineers had to follow. So you have to abide by certain codes, which inevitably end up putting wiggle room in there in case something changes or you've missed something or something like that. But I can appreciate how that then has knock-on effects from
I suppose
the developers.
what I'm saying, that obviously there's factors of safety for these things, yeah. But it's really about the how much you do want to cover your arse. Really, that is the crux of it. Yeah. And interesting, I'll tell you what it's about. Might be interesting for people that haven't quite realised. It's about insurance. So particularly nowadays. So obviously we'll get into the whole viability story, but it is interesting actually because I hadn't planned on having any engineers on here. I probably will and should at some point because it's an important part of the whole process, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I've obviously worked with lots of engineers, lots of engineers, got some engineers that are good mates. Some of whom, well, one in particular, he is basically massively ramping down his practice. He's not doing any big jobs anymore. He's just going to do little bits and pieces, because the insurance on for the bigger jobs has just got so ridiculous, and a lot of this is obviously post-Grenfell and things like that, that he just says he can't afford it and it's not worth his while, so he's just better off not doing the bigger jobs. So it's interestingly, like the unintended consequences of some of these, legislation and things means, all costs go up. The market for things get squeezed, because I do know of other engineers that have said the same thing. Look, it's just too much of a ball ache. I'm not doing it anymore. So,
and inevitably, if the costs go up from their side, that's going to be passed on to somebody later on down the line, probably. So you might end up bearing the brunt of that as the developer because of additional costs to their business.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it all impacts on the bottom line, I suppose. Not on the bottom line, actually, on viability.
Yeah,
actually, seriously. So okay, so you're working for Elliott Wood on various schemes.
Yeah.
Then how did that all go?
So it went, really well. I mean, I was very interested in sustainable design, as I know you are as well. So there were a few things that I was interested in and almost doing a bit more work on outside of working hours. So interested in looking into modern methods of construction. I did my dissertation and research into green roofs. So all of that sort of stuff really fascinated me. And Elliott Wood are very focused on that sort of engineering. So it was a really interesting place to be working. Ultimately, in the back of my mind, I still had that entrepreneurial thing sort of kicking me and saying, is this the path I want to keep following in employment, basically, not so much the company. And the one thing as well was that Elliott Wood is run by a guy called Gary Elliott, who is a very forward-thinking, entrepreneurial guy. And I think having someone like that at the top of the business actually keeps reminding you, okay, maybe I should be going off and thinking about doing something myself and having a go at something. And so with that sort of entrepreneurial background or thing in mind as well, I met a family friend who had just been through a program called Carbon 13. And I thought, that sounds interesting. So I signed myself. Did a couple of interviews, and
let's talk about that a bit because who knows who our audience is here. I'm hoping it's lots of developers, but planners, architects, everyone involved in trying to get more houses built.
Yep.
And but also maybe some startup people, including prop tech people. So a lot of people might not know how that whole prop tech world and tech in general works, including about things like Carbon 13. So do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Carbon 13 is they call it a venture builder program. The concept at Carbon 13 is that they put together a group of entrepreneurs. So in our cohort, it was 100 people interested in setting up their own businesses, whether that was, I have an idea and I'm looking for somebody to partner with, or if it was just, I've been involved in multiple startups and I'd like to do another one, but I'm looking for somebody technical to bring the ideas to the table. So at the start of this program, which was based in Cambridge at the university, they put all 100 of us into a room. And over the then course of 6 to 10 weeks, we all got to know each other, introduced ourselves, did workshops around different topics. Obviously, my background was more sort of technical, so therefore I was leading on conversations around sustainable housing, design, and ideating about what could we do to decarbonise the way we're building homes, what might that be, what might that look like, who else has ideas, who else is interested. And so through that program, I met my first co-founder, Adria. His background's more commercially focused, so I was looking for somebody with a bit more experience in startups, in setting up businesses, and he was really interested in the idea of, in some way, decarbonising home building. As I mentioned, a bit of my research was into modern methods of construction, so I was interested in how we could filter that in and looking into what are the barriers, why isn't it getting a greater adoption in MMC. So programs like that, from an entrepreneurial perspective, are a great way to get started, because typically you either have an idea that you want to put in action and you're looking for somebody to do that with, or you have experience in doing this sort of stuff and you want to maybe have an impact. And the Carbon 13 ethos was you're trying to tackle 10 million tons with the company that you set up. So you're always aiming to set up a business that could achieve that, whether that be in prop tech or any other industry. So Adria and I, started working on our idea then, which was how could we improve the uptake of modern methods construction? And the focus really was software as a scalable way of reducing the constraints and making it easier for people to find out what MMC solutions are available to them, but also which MMC solutions are viable on different sites. And we were very much focused on this sort of modern methods of construction piece. And so Carbon 13 supported us through this whole process, and then we graduated out of that and moved on to other accelerators after that, which I can go into in more detail as well if you want to, but that sort of leads on to the Geovation accelerator as well, which I know you've had experience with in the past, and now we're sort of working on together. But at about the same time, we joined Geovation. I think that's when we started chatting and had our first conversations then.
Yeah, very good. So let's just jump back a bit. So in terms of, because I know initially one of your ideas was to sort of match up MMC suppliers with developers, yeah?
Yeah.
And also I know you've done some research into, what were some of the barriers to the greater uptake of MMC? What did you discover?
So what we found was that there was a serious amount of different systems out there, and whether that be, typically when you say MMC, people think of volumetric. That's what their mind sort of goes to straight away. And there were obviously some big players in the game there making interesting solutions, but it ranged all the way down to timber frame manufacturers, which people were much more aware of, 2D panelized systems, etc. And really the main thing that we heard from property developers over and over again was, we don't have the time or resources to assess a site against every solution that's out there and work out which solution is best suited to the scheme, to the site, to the location, with the timelines. We started having a think, or working on an idea of, okay, how can we do that refining process for them? And instead of having to look at 100, here's 2 of the most suitable modern methods of construction and their suppliers that could be suitable to this scheme. So sort of trying to do that facilitation, the connection, and improving the uptake. And at the same time, we'd spoken to and visited a lot of offsite manufacturers, and their number one constraint is their pipeline. They need that reliability going through the factory in order to achieve the economies of scale, get the funding, etc., and support the workforce. So it seemed that with these sort of 2 things, if there was some way of facilitating the 2, that one side helped the developer and the other side helped that manufacturer grow their pipeline, strong, healthy leads that were actually likely to deliver the project, then we could have a big impact in improving the uptake of MMC.
Yeah, very good. And that's part of what we do now at Viability. So before, well, we'll come back to that, because explaining, what we now do and the plan, I think, will be really interesting to people, because it does solve a number of massive problems and there isn't anyone else doing it. But before we get to that, it might be worth talking about. So then obviously, well, actually, this will be useful as well, because I know, lots of startups look for funding. Yeah. So they need funding, they need expertise, and they need help. Usually, because, and here's another little thing that I've discovered. Actually, there are just so many startups. Well, look, we met one yesterday, didn't we? I won't say too much. So that have. They're from outside the industry, that and they're trying to solve a problem that isn't actually the problem, or they just something fundamental they just don't get. And that honestly, as a sort of investor in this stuff, and I get tapped up by quite a few people with ideas and talking to me about stuff, I know that 99% of them, certainly the stuff they talk to me about, which I understand, obviously land planning, development related stuff, they're just shit ideas, basically, and that are never going to work. So that's a little, I don't know, bit of advice to someone: if you are inventing a new thing, make sure you are solving a real problem, and you are talking to people from that industry about what the real problems are, and you're not like just imagining it's what you think it is, because in my experience people get this stuff wrong big time.
And I think that perfectly summarises sort of how we met you as we joined that Geovation Accelerator programme. So we were lucky enough to be accepted onto the Geovation Accelerator, but we had 2 sort of gaps in what we were doing. One was, as you say, we needed funding, we needed investment to get the business going. At that point, we'd done about a year with sort of bootstrapping it ourselves, just looking after our own backs. But we needed to raise investment. But at the same time, we knew we had the understanding and the experience on the MMC side, but we were connecting 2 sides to this equation. We were trying to connect property developers with MMC. We needed someone with the property experience, and as you say, to explain the real problems that they're facing. And so that's when we started sort of searching and at the same time connected with yourself, and started to realise that actually there could be 2 possibilities here. The person that brings that property knowledge to the table could also marry up as the first investor. So that's how we started our conversation, I think.
Yeah, very good. And again, for people that don't know, let's credit where credit is due when it comes to Geovation. So something that the sort of government really is involved in and sponsoring is actually really good. Obviously, Land Tech, my first prop tech business was with Geovation originally. They're massively helpful, and they are excellent for helping startups in this sector. So for people that don't know, do you want to explain what Geovation is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, a big number of the top prop tech companies in the UK have all been through Geovation, and that's for a reason really. But Geovation is run by the Ordnance Survey, funded and backed by the Ordnance Survey, alongside the Land Registry, and it's an accelerator programme for prop tech and geotech startups. So the aim is to support startups that are going to be using geospatial data mainly, but also property data from the land reg side. And so they support you with technical advice, startup advice, and an office space that we often work out of, and also a community. So you're surrounded by other prop tech startups, typically at a very similar stage. Normally people sort of grow out of it as they expand, but that's obviously a very good sign that companies are getting out the top end of it. And so it's just been brilliant for sort of nurturing us all the way through from, okay, we've got an idea and we want to execute on it. Where does the data lie? How can we use that data? Actually, are there any other ideas that people here with their experience can give us? And then support us all the way through a 6-month accelerator program. And then once you graduate, you have access to continuing to use their resources, their office space, etc. So it's been brilliant for our early stage development.
Yeah, very good. So Geovation is really good, and there's some other really good people in there as well, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of other startups doing incredible things as well in different spaces. I mean, it goes from wildfire management and which obviously isn't our area of expertise, all the way through to property development like us, but also property management. Basically anybody and everybody using geospatial data for some sort of prop tech or geotech solution. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so let's come back to us and our sector then. Let's perhaps talk about the problems as we see them in as regards MMC.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I say, we wanted to do that sort of matching up of the two sides of the equation. But when we started having those early conversations with you, we realised actually the viability piece for adopting different MMC solutions is much more complicated than just marrying up the like-for-like options. There are things that property developers have to achieve that do dictate much more which solutions are available to them. So we'll get onto it in more detail in a minute, I'm sure, but things like optimum sizes don't suit all MMC solutions. So it's actually about understanding which MMC solution is not only suitable to your site, but gives you the opportunity to maximize the potential of your site if you were to use that system. And obviously there's massive benefits that come with MMC, one of which being the time-saving benefits. But that has to match up and meet the need of what you need on that site.
Yeah, so let's explain this a bit more for anyone that might not quite get what we're on about. So as a developer, and for all developers, the name of the game is maximising land values, which at the same time gives us, assuming the target profit that we need in order to make it worth our while. Name of the game is always maximising land values, because that's what gets the deal done, right? So literally, it's as simple as that. So, and the best developers are, they're the ones that are the best at doing that. So they know what type, size, mix of homes is gonna work well. Obviously, you've got what's going to get planned in as well, what deals with all of the constraints, technical constraints, legal constraints, a whole gigantic list of things that we need to deal with and be aware of. And part of that, of course, is what we build and how we build it, in terms of, ranging from traditional construction, timber, bricks and blocks, to all of the various MMC options. And the fact of the matter is that MMC, and that's a real big wide range of things, obviously could be ranging from Cat 1 modular, so boxes, right down to components and everything in between. So and what often happens is people will go away, developers, they'll get planning permission, and then it's only afterwards they'll then start thinking about, oh well, maybe we can do this in some other way, or how can we best do it? By which time it's too late, because it's not been designed efficiently to suit MMC. And at the other end of the scale, if people are only trying to push, let's say, Cat 1 modular, that is absolutely, almost certainly not going to be the thing that optimizes and maximizes the value of most sites. Now, obviously, if you've got student accommodation or maybe build to rent or hotel pods or things like that, where you've got lots and lots of repetition, and maybe you're on a big site with lots of space around you, and obviously, and there is a real big advantage to getting those things built as quickly as possible and income generating, then yeah, it may be Cat 1 modular, but on a lot of housing stuff, it isn't, certainly not on smaller bespoke sites. And of course, then, also you don't have lots of repetition. So if you're only doing a few of them. So, and I think, well, I'm pretty sure that a lot of developers sort of hadn't really sussed out or realised that. So they'll go designing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And likewise, suppliers have also, certainly a few years ago, not realised it, which is one of the reasons you've got so many of the big ones going down the pan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the point you touched on there of retrospectively going for MMC or choosing MMC, it's completely understandable. As a developer, you want to look at a site and assess its viability, and you almost feel like you're getting ahead of yourself by thinking about the design, which it seems is the MMC bit. And so you think, okay, I'll look at the viability, and then you get further down the line and think, actually, this scheme might suit modern methods of construction in some form or another. And then you're trying to retrospectively take a design or a layout or whatever it might be that was set up with traditional in mind and apply these modern methods of construction to it. So one of the things we're working on in our solution is getting that on the table in the early discussions from the start, so that, okay, if this is a scheme that we're actually going to consider using modern methods of construction for, it's talked from the beginning. You're talking with your architectural team, you're talking with the design team with MMC in mind. It might not be the only option, there might be other options that you're also considering, but you're talking about it from day one. The chances then of it actually getting adopted are far higher, and overall, hopefully, that could then have the carbon saving, the environmental benefits that really is the reason that we set up the business in the first place, sort of trying to help with this optimization at the same time as environmental being one of the factors in that optimization.
Yeah. And just on that, so it's worth pointing out that the business to start with used to be called something else. I really didn't like that, as you know. We used to have lot of arguments about that. So it's now called Viability, because it really is all about, ultimately, houses aren't going to get built, stuff isn't going to happen, deals won't stack up unless they are viable, and we can work out what is it that needs to make them viable. And that could be obviously viable in all respects. So that's obviously sustainability, minimising carbon where possible, but most importantly financially, because if it doesn't make sense financially, and you can't afford to buy the land, then of course it's never going to happen. And certainly when it comes to the MMC stuff, like for like, a lot of it looks like it's more expensive than traditional, but once you find and pick the right kit that's for that site, and then you cash flow it properly and factor in the fact that, well, you might be able to build it in 80% of the time, for example, then basically you get the real answer as to, well, okay, what is it that's going to make this site, this deal viable in all respects? Looking at all of the possibilities. Sometimes it might be trad that is the best
absolutely.
thing. Other times it could be who knows what, and there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
But it's hard for developers to find and assess all of the options. Likewise, it's hard for suppliers to get to all of the developers at the right time, and we pretty much put ourselves in the middle of all of that and help solve that problem, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, if you aren't assessing every option at the early stage, you're not assessing the full viability of the scheme. Clearly, you might be assessing the majority of it just using traditional, but if you're leaving off the checks or the assessments against different solutions in the modern day, there might be ways where all of a sudden, okay, actually, if I can get this site turned around in 6 months rather than 2 years because I'm using traditional, then because I'm using modern methods of construction, then all of a sudden it might make the deal stack up better. So it's understanding all of this in one place. And I mean, as you said, touching on the other point about delivering the homes we need to deliver, ultimately, to deliver the homes, we need developers to find viable development opportunities, and that is the hardest bit. And I don't think the people up the top that are putting all the stuff in the newspapers, etc., talking about how we need to deliver more homes, I think we need to have a sit down, you and I, with them, Paul, and show them viability on the screen, and just show them how difficult it is to find viable development opportunities because of the amount of stuff that they have to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll come on to that because we've just talked. The modern methods of construction is just part of it. But obviously, when it comes to assessing land to work out what is it viable at all, what can make it viable, there's a whole load of other stuff that needs to be considered as well. And and that list seems to be getting longer by the day. Lots of these things are competing. Like it's almost like the land is expected to pay for a lot of stuff now. So ideally, it would be super sustainable. Obviously, it would be EPC A rated, if not net zero, and all the rest of it. We've got Biodiversity Net Gain. We've got SIL, basically land tax. We've got Section 106 stuff and affordable housing. So and of course, massively increasing build costs all the time. Not to mention interest rates and numerous other things we haven't even mentioned. So one of the things we do at Viability is obviously go away and get all of the. I don't know how many data points we must find and assess and analyse in order to basically come up with the optimum scheme, the optimum design for any and every site. So again, as you say, now the policy makers, and this is one of the reasons I'm doing this, one of the reasons a lot of this stuff drives me around the bend. You got people making policy and coming up with these rules, and one of the problems is there's lots of people putting their oar in, and it's not really very joined up. So actually, interestingly, we could come on to BNG around that just as one example, right? I think really understand how hard it is to get all of this information, get accurate data, assess it, and find out what that actually means for the viability or not of any site.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the common misconception is that developers are all just greedy blokes that are earning huge profit margins, and if we just add another layer on or another constraint, it's just another little bit off the top, and they can afford it. Exactly. I don't think what they quite realise is A, how constrained it already is, and B, how much of it just ends up having to, as you say, be paid for by the land. It has to come out of that sort of bottom line at the end, the way you calculate it. There are examples, aren't there, of things that they say are coming in to replace another cost, and then they just decide it's going to be added on as well as, Well,
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously you wouldn't have been around at the time, but still, community infrastructure levy was meant to replace Section 106, but it didn't. Now we've just got both. And don't get me wrong, and I talk a lot about, if it was up to me, I would provide 50% affordable housing everywhere. I want to improve and create better communities, and most good developers do. But the fact of the matter is, we've still got to buy the land. We've still got to make a profit to cover our risk, and it is a super risky business. And unfortunately, we can't provide everything, and when planners and planning tries to demand everything, actually all that happens is things become unviable and they don't get anything at all.
And that was part of the reason for our recent research that we did in the Times, that any of your listeners can go and have a look at. But saying exactly that, basically, that developers want to deliver whatever they can deliver or whatever they're required, but actually some flexibility around some of these thresholds or some of these requirements might actually have more positive effects. So the purpose of that research was to look into the effect of the 50% affordable requirement on grey belt sites and see what that does to viability. And actually what we found was that if you're more flexible, varying it by site with that threshold, that requirement, you actually end up with more affordable homes because more sites are viable, and therefore there's more capacity to deliver homes. So I think it's these things where we have to set a fixed rule on something, that then when you run it through Viability, our system, or you do it manually, however you want to check it, you start to understand the impacts of these constraints and what they do to housing delivery, affordable housing delivery, and everything else in between. It's not that it doesn't want to be delivered or nobody wants to deliver it. It's that it just needs to be understood that actually this all has an impact on the overall viability of the development. And that's ultimately, as you say, what we're trying to do with our software. We're supporting developers to automate this process, to do it quickly and accurately, and ultimately de-risk projects, so you don't miss stuff from the early stages, and you don't then get 100 grand into a site and a year down the road and then realise there's a massive constraint that's going to add a huge cost. You've identified that from the start. But equally, instead of spending days, weeks, months assessing the viability, analysing all of these different constraints, SIL, S106, BNG, like you were talking about, you can do it in one place at the click of a button and drag in all of that data to run an appraisal of viability study. And as you say, I think it then also has huge use cases from a planning policy perspective to understand, okay, what happens when we set this at X? What is the effect on overall viability?
Yeah, that's right. So, well, let's just take the grey belt as a little example around this, because we're waiting on the
absolutely,
production of a new NPPF or an updated NPPF. One of the key things I'm particularly interested to find out how it's all going to work is around the grey belt. So at the moment, there's talk about releasing grey belt land, so poor quality green belt, let's just call it, without me having to go into all of the detail now. Lots of people will know what we're talking about. But subject to it providing 50% affordable housing. Well, that's what's been talked about in the past anyway. Now, hopefully, that won't end up being a hard and fast policy, because if it is, all that will happen is nothing will happen pretty much most of the time. So, you know, I just finished a grey belt site myself, and I can tell you now that could not have provided any affordable housing at all, and been financially viable. And remember, and I'm someone that wants to provide affordable housing, so I'm not just like saying that as like, oh, I don't want to do it. You look at the numbers, it could not have supported any affordable housing. So just because a site's a grey belt, that, you know, well, if anything, almost by definition, if it's depending on what grey belt comes to be, if it's previously developed land where there's probably going to be demolition and or decontamination, i.e. higher costs, well, that's stuff that's likely to make it less viable to start with. On a lot of places, you can't even make greenfield land viable with 50% affordable housing. You just can't. So I really think it's important that planners and policymakers understand that, because honestly, it's not with, you know, developers just trying to swerve it and not provide it. It just honestly isn't viable in a lot of cases. So what happens? So I know we've spoken about this, but you know, when it comes to local plans and development plans and policy making and site allocations and things like that, viability assessment never gets done accurately enough. It never gets done properly. So my local authority might, you know, look at a bit plan on the map and say, oh yeah, great, we can build 50 houses there, or 100 or 1,000 or whatever it might be, but the viability testing never actually really gets done properly. One of the reasons is because until now, it's not a quick or easy thing to do. It is now with us, and as you know, one of the things I'm really keen on is, in an ideal world, I'd like to give it to local authorities. Now, obviously, we've got to make it financially viable for us, actually, because it is, you know, at the end of the day, we've got to, you know, build the product and build the business and all the rest of it. So whether we're going to be able to give it away or not, I'm not so sure. But I in due course want this, you know, to become the go-to viability tool that everyone uses. Developers to do their appraisals, so they can, you know, find out pretty accurately what's going to maximise the value of a bit of land in minutes rather than days or weeks or sometimes months. And likewise, local authorities can do the same when they're looking, well, okay, what might be viable for a site? What's optimal? What's the best thing to build on there? How could it be built? What is it going to maximise the land value, or more importantly, maximise the number of homes we can get out of land in various areas? And the beauty of the way we're doing it is that it's using all real market data that can be verified. So there's none of the question about, oh, well, it's, developers are bullshitting the figures and they're making it look worse than it is. And basically what usually ends up happening at the end of a planning application, a process, or even an appeal, all of that can be dealt with at the beginning. So we're not wasting time and money arguing about stuff that didn't need to be argued about, because all of that, again, one of the things I think perhaps planners and more likely committees don't seem to realise is that the more you force developers down the route of unnecessary cost and delays, which if you're lucky they'll just cost you a fortune, if you're really unlucky they'll send you bust, right? All of that unnecessary increased cost actually results in less good design, because it takes cost away that might have been available for it, and most importantly, less affordable housing. So the sooner we can all get on the same page, literally, and start dealing with things properly, the better.
Yeah, exactly. I think it also about that transparency piece. So, as you say, when it comes to open book, okay, well, where did this number come from? We're building a system that not only gives you that sort of front end, nice summary, easy to access and understand, but also gives you where everything is coming from in behind it. So if you're having those conversations, well, okay, here's ours, here's yours, here are the numbers sat in behind them. And then we can start to have genuine conversations across the table about, okay, well, you can see here from my numbers, we can't afford to deliver all of those things. Which ones are the bits that we might be willing to compromise on that we don't deliver if we want houses? If we don't want houses, then fine, this site won't go ahead. But ultimately, everybody in the industry wants to deliver more homes. That's the end goal and the aim for every different party. So we have one focused or one goal in mind that we all share. It's just understanding each other and using this as a platform for transparency and agreeing and coming to agreement with each other.
So really, viability in terms of who it helps or is intended to help, it's obviously planners with their policy making. And again, if we're all using the same system and the same numbers, they can be much more confident that actually, what they think things should be or are going to be is what they are going to be. From developers' point of view, they can get to the right answer really, really quickly, because of course I know that, it's 95% of things you look at don't stack up, even if you're really good at knowing how to get them to stack up. That is just a fact. Very often, developers will spend days, weeks, often months, and as they go through the process and start getting the information together, only to eventually find out that it doesn't stack. So they've wasted a whole ton of management time and money, sometimes on surveys and all sorts of stuff, only to eventually work out, shit, this doesn't work after all. Sometimes I even see situations where people have done the deal and they've bought the site, and only then they start realising it doesn't stack up. Now, I've got to say, that's one of the things that really worries me, because of course what happens when that happens and people have basically paid too much for land, discovered things too late and got themselves in the shit, that's when they start dumbing things down, cutting costs, because it's sort of like the only thing they can do. Yeah. That's one of the ways we get diabolical, horrible looking development, which none of us want. So conversely, the other thing that I know a lot of developers do, they'll look at stuff and think that it doesn't stack up and then walk away from it, sometimes again after spending a whole lot of time and money. Whereas in actual fact, if they had looked at what it takes to optimize the site, maybe using modern methods of construction, maybe using a different type or size or mix of homes, then actually it could have stacked up after all. Because, so, as I know, one of the things been always my little niches that we now do at Viability is all of the detailed market research to look at houses, flats, different mixes, optimum sizes, and that's the key to work out, okay, what is it that's going to maximise the GDV on this site, and then of course we're looking to minimise the cost in terms of MMC and more efficient ways of doing things. That's obviously what maximises the land value whilst maintaining your required profit margin, but importantly it does it really quick. So the whole point is, what we're doing here is trying to make sure people don't waste their time on stuff that's going to go nowhere. but by the same token, they don't end up walking away from things that actually could be made to work.
Yeah, exactly. It's looking at every site with the tools you need to optimize it. Viability, those are the tools you need to optimize it. And as you say, going away and gathering all the data is a long, laborious process. But even once you've gathered that data, what you then do with it, or how you use it to draw conclusions, work out what is the best house type, the best size of that house type, etc. Those are the bits that take serious time, and now we're putting that at their fingertips at the click of a button. So the aim, as you say, is save them time and resources on assessing these sites and avoid them missing opportunities, but also drastically de-risk the whole process. We want to take the risk out of those early stage opportunities, and then it's up to developers what they do with the added time. Do you look for more sites or source more deals, or spend your time doing the stuff that actually has to be done the sort of analog way, building relationships with landowners? You're getting all of this time back to actually do the deals, the real bit where the value is made, rather than spending your time collecting the data, running the analysis, working out the optimization, and always making sure that you're not missing opportunities, as you say. So if you could go through every site in seconds and know that you're not missing the opportunities, then that gives you the credibility to go on and do more deals.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, and the bit that we haven't really talked about is the MMC manufacturers and suppliers in the middle.
Yeah.
Because, as we know, one of their big problems has been pipeline. They, particularly if you've got big factories and stuff, it's
overheads.
like overheads. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, look, we've got all of these great systems, but how do we let the market know about them?
Yeah.
How can the market price them in, design them in at the right stage, i.e. the beginning, rather than the end?
Absolutely, and you and I have been together to visit some of the manufacturers, and I mean the setups they have are brilliant. The systems they're building are normally far higher performing, using good materials and well designed, and usually better built than they are because of the controlled factory environment.
Yeah.
But when we go and see these big setups, you realise the overheads that are there, the number of staff that are relying on the pipeline to keep the income, the materials, the machinery, etc. They're beasts that end up needing to be fed, and so you have to have that constant supply of opportunities coming in, and so going out and speaking to every developer is sort of critical. But we're taking that step out and saying, well, now developers have all of your information at their fingertips the minute they're looking at a site. The chances are that the opportunities will come through to you from there on, and then you can grow your pipeline with projects that aren't speculative either. So it's not somebody just picking up a phone and saying, I've driven past a site, I think I might use you guys. It's, I've assessed the viability of my development site. It works well with your system. I'd love to come and have a chat or design a system with you guys, or work with your system, etc. So yeah, it's giving them those strong pipelines that ultimately they can then use as well to expand, get investment that they might require. I mean, some of these big volumetric modular failures were because of pipeline. That was their number one constraint.
Yeah, absolutely. So and of course, that's still going to be a problem actually for those people with massive factories, for example.
The bigger, the harder.
Yeah, because of the planning system.
Yeah.
So, I know there's been various reports. There was another Lords committee thing relatively recently, looking at what the problems were. Like, I think we pretty much identified all of the problems really. So, someone just needs to solve them, and hopefully that's what we're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the aim.
Very good. Okay, so that's the big ones, aren't they? So we've got build cost, helping the planners with policy making, helping the developers optimize stuff and not waste their time. BNG is a fairly big one, a bit new and relatively causing a few problems actually for a lot of developers, particularly on smaller sites. So again, what we do is basically, what I used to do, the old-fashioned way. Have to go away, get all of this information together, get a whole load of consultants, and identify the constraints and work out, well, okay, how do I develop with them or around them in the optimal way? So BNG is obviously a big one now. Most places you have to provide at least a 10% biodiversity net gain. So, which can significantly constrain what you can do on a site. And so one of the key questions is well, okay, what do I keep on the site in terms of biodiversity, and what does that cost me in terms of perhaps lost space that I'm not developing, weighed up against, well, okay, could I buy credits and do it off-site somewhere? And that's all an interesting calculation, and what's available. So again, that's just one of the sort of key things that we do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is one of those big new ones that people are still trying to get their head around. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a great idea. It's good to be looking at these sort of things. But there's very little knowledge out there of how you assess this, what are the implications of it, and how does it affect the viability. So what we wanted to do was build in part of the tool that allows you to quickly analyse a site. What have you got there in terms of biodiversity? What is on your site? What does a 10% uplift look like? And then what are the implications of that on the viability of your site through appraising it, using the costs from that. And as you mentioned, it can vary whether you deliver that uplift on the site. So if you have a proportion of your site that you can deliver it on, or whether you have to deliver it off-site, and even the distance from your site that you have to deliver it all has an impact on how much that costs you. And so, yeah, we're using geospatial data again, back to the sort of geovation roots. We're using aerial imagery. We're assessing the number of units of biodiversity on a site, and then we can work out what a 10% uplift looks like. And then based on the input from the user of where that is going to be delivered, we can then start to analyse the costs and see what that does as an impact on viability. And as you say, sometimes they can be huge costs. And if you didn't spot them when you were first analysing the viability of the site, and you went and made a land offer without all of the information about it, it could make or break the deal later on down the line when you've got sunk costs in the tens or hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, very, very, very good. Yeah, and it often does. So in short, just for people who don't know, you go to the software, click on the site, it goes away and gets all the relevant data. Basically, I often liken what we have to do with development to 10-dimensional chess. Right? I've said it before, because there are so many complex, interrelated things that you need to balance and weigh up to work out what is the best thing to do. And it takes a long time and a lot of money, and we basically effectively do that really quickly and give you a automated development appraisal, that's like 98% accurate in seconds rather than hours, days or weeks or sometimes months.
And the other thing we're giving them is the step-by-step process to make sure that you're not missing stuff. I mean, even the most senior of developers can miss things as they go through. This way, you go through the system, okay, check ones are constraints, then we move through the process, and only then do you get to the end to build the appraisal. If something's identified early on, you get flagged at the stage you need to know about it. So it's making sure that those phases are met as you go through the viability assessment.
Yeah, very good. So anyway, so that's that. So this wasn't meant to be an advert, although I must say it's sounding a bit like one, because look, it is a fantastic bit of kit. It saves. It solves a load of really important problems for a number of people in the industry. So we've just sort of had a soft launch recently, and so it's now available to buy at a website near you. What's the website address?
So visit viability.site. On there, you'll find out all about the system. You can book a demo or a call with any of the team. You can watch videos and sign up to a trial as well. If anybody wants to reach out as well, we're on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, very good. And that's so. And likewise, suppliers. I suppose, all of the MMC manufacturers and suppliers, really important to get them involved, get them on the platform. Let us know what you've got. Let us know what it does, how it performs, what it costs. And the whole point is we will literally put it in front of the whole market so they can choose, well, okay, great, that is the thing that's going to work best for this site. And then ultimately, hopefully, everyone's a winner. We'll get more housing created the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking to work with those manufacturers one by one so that we understand their needs, their requirements. So we're doing the hard work, the labour in the background, and putting all of that data onto the system, because we appreciate that a cookie cutter for MMC just doesn't work. So we're working with them to do the hard work for the manufacturers, get them on the system, but also for the developers so that they can use that system in their appraisals. Yeah,
very good. Okay, what was that website again?
Viability.site.
Viability.site. Okie doke. Right, well, look, hopefully that has been of some interest trust me, it is really, really, really good. Should be another game changer for the industry. So check that out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and go to viability.site and let us know what you think. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week, where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes, and a much more beautiful world.